It's time to start.
Perry, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome, welcome. I guess it's morning on the East and West Coast, very early on the West Coast. Good afternoon to everyone attending from Europe, and good evening to anyone dialing in from Asia. My name is Perry Sedman. I have been a lawyer for over 40 years and a member of PISLAP almost since its inception. So I want to welcome you to the fifth and final session of PISLAP's Autumn Intensives. And before we begin, I think we should give a deep thanks to our executive committee, Peter Gable, Nanette Schorr, and Elaine Quinn, and our sterling Director of Administration, Robin Kravitz, for organizing these wonderful intensives. For those who may be joining, yes, clap, clap, clap. Or, you know, the old fashioned. For those who may be joining us for the first time or as a reminder, I want to give you a short overview of PISLAP. PISLAP stands for the Project for Integrating Spirituality, Law, and Politics. We are a group of lawyers, law students, teachers, activists, and even non-lawyers who seek to work together to support the creation of a new legal culture. We have a 25-year history of gathering and writing together and having conferences and intensives to share and support each other's work. Our aspiration is to support the emergence of a legal culture that goes beyond the existing system, that does very little to foster compassion, mutual understanding, and healing of conflict and of relationships. We fully support the many legal struggles to safeguard human rights in the legal system and fully participate in those, but we also see ourselves as seeding the groundwork along with many other groups for creation of a new legal order. I want to urge you to consider officially becoming a member of PISLAP, and you can check out our history and membership forms at spiritlawpolitics.org. Now, our program today is on transformative mediation. As many of you know, mediation is a procedure in which the parties discuss their disputes with the assistance of a trained and impartial third person who assists them in reaching a settlement. The mediator is a facilitator, really, who has no power to render a resolution of the conflict, but whose goal is to bring the sides together, which is, of course, diametrically opposed to what happens in a litigation. Now, transformative mediation, which is what our program is about today, takes the process a step higher. In transformative mediation, mediators focus on not only empowering the people in the dispute to resolve their conflict, but encourages them to recognize each other's needs and interests. The goal in transformative mediation is not to settle at all costs, but to expand the opportunity to reach a deep and durable resolution while fostering the parties' ability to address both the current and future problems. Now, in today's session, it is titled Transformative Mediation in the Context of Legal Services Work. Our presenters are Antoinette Delruelle. Oh, Delruelle. I knew I would screw that up.
You did.
And Nanette Schorr, who will be joined by Lenina, Trinidad, and Vicki Gibson. I'm going to turn the program over to them, and I understand they will introduce themselves further.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much, Perry, for that wonderful intro. So the four of us are gonna introduce ourselves, and then there's gonna be time for all of you to introduce yourselves as well before we sort of launch into the content. So I work at Bronx Legal Services, where I supervise our education law practice. I also have a long background in family law. I've worked in the area of child welfare, representing parents seeking to reunite with their children. I've represented survivors of domestic violence, and I've been working for about 6 or 7 years now with Antoinette to develop a joint mediation project between Legal Services for New York City and New York Legal Assistance Group, where Antoinette works and has taken a lot of leadership on this issue of bringing mediation to the low-income community. And I'm also on the executive committee of PISLAP. So Antoinette, over to, or I'm sorry, Lenina, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, buenos días, buenas tardes. My name's Lenina Trinidad. I'm an attorney at Manhattan Legal Services. I've been doing that for about 20 years. I specialize in family law and in domestic violence. I'm also a trained mediator. I was trained by Antoinette and Nanette and Legal Services and NILAG, and enjoy doing this work and look forward to talking more about mediation and the law. Vicki.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vicki Gibson. I'm a senior staff attorney at Brooklyn Legal Services and have 7 years of mediation experience. Before coming to Legal Services, I was doing employment mediations, which is extremely different and not transformative in any way. And then I came to Brooklyn Legal Services in 2015 and started doing, this transformative model and have never looked back. It's nice to meet you guys.
Hi, I'm Antoinette Delruelle. I'm an attorney and a mediator with the New York Legal Assistance Group, which is a free legal services organization, just like Leslie. And like Lenina and Vicki and Nanette, for many, many years, actually about 18 years, I represented survivors of domestic violence in family court and divorces, custody, child support, etc. And then in 2013, I started the mediation project at NILAG, and since then I'm only mediating, and we all at NILAG and Leslie, we only mediate with couples where there is no domestic violence present. So, and it's good to be with you today. And now we are curious to know a little bit more about you. And I think we're going to ask just to say maybe where you are, since you're a bit all over the world, and maybe in one sentence what you do, or and 2 words about why you're here. Just 2 words about why you took the time to sit here in front of your Zoom during these 2 hours. And maybe I'm going to ask people, because if we wait for people to call, it's going to take a time. And I'm going to ask people in the order that I see them on my screen. May not be the same order on your screen. Enid Langbird, you want to go first?
Not at all, but I'm in New York. I'm a retired lawyer. I actually stopped practicing a few years ago when my husband got sick, and then after he died, I never really went back. I practiced in all different areas of law. I never did family law, although I did a lot of divorces. And I'm a domestic violence survivor, although I never really talk about it. So I'm a friend of Nanette's, and I actually miss the law, which I never thought I would. And I've looked at different ways of volunteering and things, and nothing has ever worked out. So I was just very interested when Nanette spoke about it last night over dinner. So
good. Peter, well, everybody knows Peter. Should we? Well, we can still introduce yourself and say your 2 words.
Say a few words, namely that I'm in San Francisco, and I was a law professor for about 40 years, teaching contracts and law and social change, law and politics, professional responsibility, many courses like that. And but I'm here for the whole thing as a PISLAP person, but I'm very interested in how legal services, which has such a potentially significant cultural impact. So many legal services offices around the country. It's usually funded by the state, at least to some extent, and it's just a very important institution. Can it, in its tradition, is a sort of high volume representation of multiple clients who keep coming toward you. And the question is, can you bring a PISLAP perspective into a setting like that?
Perry?
Okay, I've introduced myself. I've been in private practice. I'm an intellectual property lawyer, actually, and I'm now semi-retired. I am located physically in Washington, D.C., although I spend most of my time in Miami Beach. And again, I've been a member of PISLAP, I think, since the initial meeting, Politics of Meaning, back in '96. So pleasure to be here.
And your 2 words for being here, just because you want to see the whole conference, or?
Well, I am also a trained mediator. So I'm very interested in, taking it to the next level. Although I don't do much, I'm still interested in transformative mediation and how that is really practiced.
Allison?
Hi, good morning. My name is Allison Dunlop. I'm an attorney at Brooklyn Legal Services. I work in the Family Law Domestic Violence Unit, which has been there for the last 20 years. Prior to that, I represented nonprofits in community economic renewal projects. And I'm here because I like to learn. In my field, I've, represented survivors of domestic violence in immigration matters, divorces, family cases, and I feel this is the last frontier. So I love the ladies that are presenting. They're my colleagues, and I'm learning a lot from them. And I just want to, just keep learning from them. So I came also to support them in this training.
Thank you, Allison. Rand? You're muted. Yeah. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. My name is Rand Rosenblatt. I live in Philadelphia. I taught constitutional law, health law, poverty law, many other social justice courses, over 40 years of teaching. I retired in 2018. I'm still active in discussion groups and workshops and organizations like this one. When I was in law school, I worked with Ed Sparer, one of the founding people of modern legal services. I actually worked on cases like Shapiro v. Thompson and Dandridge and Rosado v. Wyman, cases that went to the Supreme Court in the late 60s. And I was very much part of what was called the welfare rights movement. And we won some notable victories. And at the same time, looking back on it, one could say this is sort of a great proof of Peter Gable and other people in critical legal studies, of which I was also a part of, our concern about the limitations of the rights model. And looking back on the attempt to emphasize rights in welfare law, one could say it was a decidedly mixed experience, and politically one could argue it ended up with severe problems. So I'm very interested in PISLAP's work. I'm a member of PISLAP. I've been to most of the sessions, and I look forward to what we're talking about today.
Great. Thank you, Rand. Brad?
Hi, good to be with everyone on this last of the series of the intensives. And I've been with PISLAP for, I don't know how many, just several years, I think. I'm an attorney and mediator in New York. I'm a adjunct professor of mediation and meditation at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. My background in mediation has been facilitative. I've mediated in civil and small claims courts in the EEOC. And I'm also chair and co-founder of Mediators Beyond Borders, New York. And actually I have one of my students who is attending. I provided extra credit from students in my course if they attended today. So please give her a warm welcome when she says hello. And I'm here because I teach my students, I mean, apart from wanting to support PISLAP and Nanette and others, is that I do teach my students there are three major forms of mediation, the evaluative, facilitative, and transformative models, but I always disclose that I'm not that familiar with the transformative mediation model. I mean, I know, the outlines and contours of it a bit, but I'm very interested to learn more about that model as I'm trained in the facilitative model of mediation.
Bruce?
Hi, how are you all?
Oh, I thought that we said Bruce Peterson, but you are muted.
There, I'm trying to
I'm
unmute
so
myself.
That's
sorry.
okay.
Did you say me?
Yes, because I'm
Okay.
because I'm looking at
In your order,
to make
yeah,
sure
okay.
that I'm not going to forget anyone. Yes.
Okay, I'm Bruce Peterson. I'm a retired judge in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've had a lot of experience in family law. We have a separate family court here. It's kind of a division. I was the presiding judge there for a while and was involved in a lot of different efforts to reduce conflict in family matters. So I'm interested in the topic. I've also heard from Nanette about her efforts and her involvement in introducing mediation in the New York system. And I also, I'm the least familiar with transformative mediation of the three models Brad has mentioned. By the way, I teach a class on lawyers as peacemakers, and I've prevailed on Brad to come and talk about mediation and meditation, which is an interesting combination of things. But I'm interested in how transformative mediation, which has a focus not on settling the case, works in a high volume, very practical system like the New York legal services system. So I appreciate you all doing this for us today. Thank you.
Aideen? Or Aideen, I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Hello, I presume it's me, Elaine.
That's okay.
Oh, sorry, maybe it's not me, is it?
It was, I don't know how you say Aideen?
It's Elaine.
Oh, Elaine.
No,
okay.
it's I think she meant Aideen Burr, and that's
Yeah.
Elaine.
Oh, sorry,
It doesn't
sorry.
That's
matter.
okay.
You go, Aideen.
Are you sure?
Go, Byrne. I'm not going to pronounce your first name. I'm just going to go with your last name. Quinn, you wait 1 second. Byrne, go ahead.
It's Aideen.
Aideen.
You're very close. I know Irish names can be tricky. And I work in Edinburgh Law School in the Pro Bono and Clinical Legal Education Department. We're actually the only law clinic in Scotland that does family law work. And so I'm very interested to hear today. We don't do any mediation. The only way I've really heard about it is I created a not-for-profit called Pro Bono Skills, and that's for students that are doing pro bono work across Scotland, England, and Wales. And we have some mediation content up there, but I'm really quite uninformed. I used to work as a legal executive for a short while with a family law solicitor. Well, she's a general practitioner, but she did a lot of family law in Ireland. And again, mediation was kind of there at the side, but I'm just really, really excited to learn more. Thanks.
Thank you. Aline? Quinn? Now it's your turn and yours. Yeah.
Quinn works fine.
Quinn.
Yeah, I'll keep it short, but I'm Elaine Quinn. I'm in Ireland and I have no knowledge really of the subject. I'm very interested in becoming a mediator though, and I'm hoping to do that training soon. So yeah, I'm certainly interested in transformative mediation and really glad to be here.
Great. I'm not sure.
Hi,
How do
thank
you pronounce?
Yue.
Yue. Hi.
Hi, my name is Yue from Oxford. I just finished 5 hours of teaching. I'm at Oxford Brookes University, and like Quinn, I have no knowledge about mediation, but always happy to learn, especially the transformative side of things, because I think these are soft skills that I could use because I'm taking care of a lot of students and they do open up to me, and some of them are really dark, to which I need decompressing as well. So in a sense, like I want to seek for soft skills to gain some resilience, and very happy to learn.
Great. Carolina?
Hi. Yep. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Carolina Guerral. I'm a senior staff attorney at Bronx Legal Services. My practice is mainly focused on immigration cases, but I also have a small caseload of family law, and I would consider myself a beginner mediator. I was also trained by Nanette and Antoinette and the mediation training a couple of years ago. So I'm just super excited about mediation. I haven't actually done a full mediation yet, but I'm very excited to learn about transformative mediation, and just because it's a little bit different from the type that that I have experience with. So yeah, so excited to be here. Nice to meet everybody.
Lindsay? I don't know what your last name is, but Lindsay is fine with us. Can you hear us? Can you say 2 words about where you are? And Brad, is Lindsay your student, or is it another one who's student?
Ruth is actually my student.
Ruth is your student. Okay, we're gonna go to Ruth then, because Lindsay, I don't know if she can hear us.
Well, I think Lindsay put something in the chat.
Oh, yeah, she was just listening. Okay, that's not a problem. Go ahead, Ruth.
Good morning. I'm actually a student at John Jay College in New York. And as you all know, I was invited by my professor, Bradley Roth. I'm very excited to hear what will be discussed today. I do aspire to attend law school for the upcoming year, and I do currently work at the district attorney's office. And I do interview a series of victims for different crimes committed against them, especially dealing with domestic violence and special unit victims. Meditation is very important. So I'm definitely learning to hear everything that's said today, and definitely hoping to learn a lot in this mediation training.
Great. Layla? If you can
Hi,
hear
my
us.
Hi, my name is Lila Stellick-Berry, and I live in Washington, D.C., but I'm proudly from Chicago. And I work at the U.S. Institute of Peace in the international peace building world. My background is in international transitional justice. I'm interested in also domestic transitional justice, where there is not so much, especially on the international level, a focus on restorative practices or transformative practices. So I'm interested in learning more about that world for future program design efforts and work in that field to integrate a different approach.
Great, thank you. And last one, Sylvia Clute.
Yes, sir.
Sylvia, do you want to
say?
Okay,
I'm unmuted, yes.
Yeah.
So I am multitasking, meeting 2 deadlines that are very short, but I didn't want to miss this presentation, so I'm going to listen in. I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and I do unitive justice. I was a trial attorney 28 years, but thankfully I'm out of that and doing what I love now. And member
Which is
of
what I
PISLAP.
couldn't understand. Something justice? I couldn't hear the
I do
word.
unitive justice. It's a model that has no punitive elements.
I see.
So it's a theory. It was actually, I did a presentation on Saturday
Good.
about
Great.
it. Yeah.
Thank
Great.
you. Thank you all. All right, so now, Nanette, you're going to talk a little bit about the principles. A little bit quickly. We're a little bit behind schedule, but it's not a problem. It's just we're going to speak very fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Antoinette, and thank you, everyone, for those wonderful introductions. Also, I did put Brad's organization incorrectly in the chat. I had a problem with my web browser. So Brad, if you wouldn't mind putting the correct one in, I'd much appreciate it. So we mediate using the understanding-based model, and all of us here at Legal Services were actually trained by Antoinette. So really, she's the fount of our training and practice. But Antoinette was trained, and we continue to work with the model developed by the Center for Understanding in Conflict, which was co-founded by Jack Himmelstein, who is actually also a PISLAP member, and Gary Friedman. And their model is a transformative model, both inside and outside the legal system in ways that we will discuss later on. So it's a model that seeks to engage people in conflict in authentic conversations that help to build the understanding between them and help them find their own best solutions. It not only encourages the parties to bring their fullest selves to mediation, but it also encourages the professionals who are mediating to do the same and to emerge in, feeling more whole because they have served their clients in that way. Mediation does not expect us to come without our own judgments, but it does work with the judgments that we have, surfacing them, examining them, and addressing them. We seek to support the parties in making knowing and informed choices together in ways that are respectful both of each other, for themselves, and for the process that we're in together. And the law is part of the mediation in that we explain it to the parties, but the parties themselves decide what weight they will give to the law in their mediation. So again, understanding-based model. Another core principle is that the parties own the conflict. So we ensure that parties, we constantly reinforce the point that the conflict is that of the parties. The mediator is there to facilitate communication and help move it forward, but it is the parties' conflict to have and to resolve if they choose to. Making joint decisions, that's a third component. So from the very beginning of mediation, we try to seek agreements. We give the parties the chance to set the agenda, to do everything by agreement, including when they meet, what subjects to discuss first, who speaks first, and if they're in person, where they sit in the room. So everything is subject to mediation and to joint decision-making. And lastly, we go under positions to interests. So when people come and they state positions, those positions may seem kind of firm and unmovable. So to be able to get underneath the conflict and move forward, we go beneath the positions and we try to tease out what is important to each party. What is important to them if they're mediating regarding children? What is important regarding spending time with your child? What are your hopes and aspirations for your child? So we're there to find common ground and then use that shared ground in terms of the interests to then move up again and create a sense of mutual understanding and ultimately to problem solve. So I will turn it back to Antoinette.
Yes, so I was listening to everyone, and including people, and thinking about labels like transformative or facilitative, or and I think that for me, more than the words, the transformation is, I think, in two ways. One is a transformation in how the people are used to dealing with conflict, which is that people are, and I'm not just saying people, I'm saying like kids are used to going to a person who decides which one of the two siblings is right and which one is wrong, which one is going to be rewarded and which one is going to be punished. It's almost like in our DNA. And so that just being in a different teaching or ways, or almost a different way of resolving conflict is a transformation for most of our clients. And the second one is hopefully, even if they didn't reach a full agreement, they will see that maybe there is a different way in the future to deal with the other person and to deal with conflict in a different way in the future. So NILAG and LISNI have been working together since about 2014, I think. And the idea that we had is that even though the law is not the main criteria necessarily for people who are mediating, the law is one of the criterias. And especially for low income, often immigrant clients, it's very important for them to also have a lawyer to advise them during the mediation. So our idea was that for some cases, NILAG was going to be the mediator, and then LISNI, one of the lawyers for LISNI, would be the lawyer for one of the party. We call them consulting attorney for one of the party. And then I have a group of mediators that I have worked with who volunteer to be the consulting attorney for the other party. And this way we have a model where we mediate with the parties without the lawyers present, because we try to limit a little bit the number of pro bono hours that the lawyers give. It's hard to find lawyers to do the work for free. So we don't want to necessarily have them sit in during all the mediation sessions, but each party has a lawyer to advise the party, since the mediator is neutral, cannot give legal advice. And also to review the agreement and maybe make edits, suggest changes, make sure that people understand that legal documents that we have written that should have all of their agreements made in mediation. But as we know, sometimes there's a gap between what people discuss and then what they see on papers. And so the lawyers help the parties with reviewing the agreement. And when the parties have a final agreement, they sign their agreement, and then whoever was the mediator, if it's NILAG or LISNI, then files an uncontested divorce with the court. And an uncontested divorce here in New York is just paperwork that gets signed. Some parties have to sign papers, we have to sign some papers, and finally the judge signs the divorce judgment. And so when the parties are doing a divorce, let's say this way, what I always say to people when they call us in the beginning, I always say, you will not even know where the courthouse is. You don't have to appear in front of a judge. You do everything. Now we're doing it via Zoom. You're mediating, you're meeting with your consulting attorney, probably via Zoom. We review the agreement, you sign the agreement, and then we do the uncontested divorce papers for you. So that's basically the project that we started in 2014, and that's been going ever since. Okay, I don't know if we have time for questions. We're a bit behind, but that being said, I'm okay with maybe 2 minutes of questions before Vicki sets up the discussion. I would say our project is very pragmatic. It has a very pragmatic end, which is to help people have a final enforceable judgment or order from the court. So, and okay, looks like we're good. Vicki, do you want to talk about what we're going to talk about after this?
Sure. So we're going to discuss the potential for transformation on the parties, on the attorneys, and the judicial system, and talk about some of the obstacles to transformation that are faced by, parties and mediators while we're trying to resolve their conflict together.
And we will have a 10-minute break. I forgot to say that earlier on at 11:50. So from 11:50 to 12, we will have a quick break, and then we'll reconvene for the last hour.
Antoinette, I just wanted to add one thing about our model, which is that we also have every 2 months or so, we all meet as a group to discuss not only the mediations that we're working on, but the process, how we're feeling about it. We often look at cases that people are doing in their work, their litigation work, which is the majority of their work, and we try to bring mediation skills and approaches to those cases and support each other, and also think about how can mediation impact our organizations and the work of advocating for low-income people as a whole. So that's an important piece, I think, of our model.
True. Should have said that, absolutely. And the fact that because the lawyers at LISNY still do a lot of domestic violence work, we sometimes role play, if there is a conflict between a lawyer and the party, or between two parties, or like we role play, how could we approach this case differently? And even though it's a litigated domestic violence case, it's not we're not doing a mediation, but we're using some of these ideas of mediation, or some of the skills, which we'll do at the end of looping, to help in the litigation context. What were we going to talk about? We were talking about the dynamic between the parties.
So I think we were first talking about the transformation on clients.
Okay.
Yeah, so pointing out the dynamic.
So I think that one thing that we're trying to do a lot in mediation is that very often people are in conflict, and they have been sort of in the same conflict forever. And I think that can resonate with all of us, because in our personal relationships, often if you think about when you have disagreement with your partner, your parents, your siblings, whatever, your children, it's almost like you know what they're going to say, and then you know what you're going to respond to what they're going to say, and then you know what's going to happen, right? And we are all in these dynamics. So most of the time, we talk and then we resolve it and move on. I think that in divorces, often this is the root of their conflict, and then they bring that dynamic, however that dynamic was, they bring it into the conflict in the divorce. So we often, what we do is we will loop that dynamic. We will see the dynamic in the mediation, and we will say, oh, we see this dynamic. We see that one of you, whatever, that party is very, very strong in their feelings, very animated, and say what they want, and is really demanding, and the more that party is animated and demanding, the less the other party talks, the more silent the other party becomes. And then in the end, the party who talks a lot thinks that they have an agreement because the other party doesn't say anything or just says okay. But in fact, it's not really an agreement. And then the next time they see us, guess what? This whatever agreement they had is just falling apart, right? Because there's not really it wasn't really decided by both parties. So instead of saying, okay, let's go talk about that issue that we talked about last time, and let's talk about it again, which will probably, if you don't change anything, it will have the same result. We loop that dynamic. We say, we see that dynamic. Do you see it? And the most part, people will say, yes, that's our dynamic. And so we'll say, well, would you like to try to change it? We're not saying we can, because people usually will say, no, we can't change that dynamic. This is our dynamic. So we say, we don't know if we can, but would you like to try to change it? Do you have the motivation to change it? Because if you don't even have the motivation to change it, probably we should end this mediation, because it's going to go nowhere, right? But most of the time people say, oh yeah, if there was a way, we'd like to try to change it. And then we say, okay, let's brainstorm, how could we change it? How could we support the party who doesn't talk very much? How can we, and then maybe the person who talks a lot understands that, okay, if I want the divorce, I have to change my dynamic because otherwise this mediation is going nowhere. So that's one of the way that we try to transform how people relate to each other in conflict. The other way that I try to sometimes change how they relate is some people, like in mediation, it seems to me that they do not know how to listen to each other at all. They just are, it's almost like you've never learned to ride a bike or to go swim. They've never learned to listen in any meaningful way. And so occasionally we will try to, I will try to say, okay, let's try to see if you can listen to each other. Again, the saying like, I know this dynamic, you interrupt each other all the time. And in the end, you're not listening to what each other is saying. That's true, that's true. They usually acknowledge that's true. Well, would you like to change that dynamic, that way that you talk? Yes, why? And then I will teach them the looping with the technique that is the bedrock of mediation, or at least the mediation model, the way that we are teaching and practicing, which we'll do at the end. And sometimes I feel like even if they don't have a final agreement on their custody of their children or on the divorce, they'll learn that, oh, maybe there was a different way to talk to each other. It's not the panacea, because obviously if they've been not listening for 30 or 40 years, it's hard to teach that in an hour. But at least it opens the door to a different way, that they know that at least it exists. And sometimes it's amazing because we mediate and we loop the parties, and then sometimes even without us saying anything, people will start looping each other. They'll start saying like, oh, what I hear you say is, and then they'll say what the other party has just said, which is what looping is. It's active listening. So that's another way that I think we see a transformation in how people relate to each other in conflict. Nanette, do you want to talk about the cases?
Yes. So we thought we would give you an example of a successful situation where we were able to use mediation skills to sort of shift a dynamic between a couple and increase communication around co-parenting. So this is a case I co-mediated actually with a social worker from our office, so not any of the team that's on here. When we took on the case, the parties had filed cases for custody, visitation, and child support against each other in family court. The parties have a severely autistic son. The mother had primary care of the child. The father saw very little of the child, and the mother was preparing to relocate outside of New York City, which would have meant that father and son would have had very, very limited contact, particularly because the father had low income and would not have been able to travel. We spent quite a bit of time developing the parties' interests. So the father's interest was in seeing his son, making sure he maintained a relationship with him, that he's involved in his life and involved in planning for his future. And we also established that the mother wanted the child to have a meaningful connection with his father and was willing to provide some financial support for him to see the child and be involved in his life, even if she moved out of town. So as the mediation went on, more and more emerged about the parties' needs, desires, and obstacles. Turns out that the mother had arthritis and wanted to relocate in order to be in a warmer climate. She expressed frustration about the father's lack of skill in interacting with the child. And the father expressed how difficult he found that interaction with their severely autistic son because he wasn't with him on a regular basis, which led him to sort of self-limit his contact. So a lot of, and the father was also, as I said, very low income, lived doubled up with family. and it was hard for him to host his child. So as we sort of peeled away during our mediation, layer upon layer of conflict, really the wishes, the hopes, the dreams of the parties, each of the parties reemerged, and their communication got better and better. The more that the father's aspirations were validated and expressed in the discussion, the more he was able to participate as a full partner in the mediation. And we addressed quite a few obstacles that had come up in communication along the way, you know, the family conflicts and other things. The mother gave the father tips and suggestions on how to make the visits with the child more meaningful. And ultimately the parties reached a full agreement for the future, with the mother pulling back from her decision to relocate. And because it seemed like the father and son were going to have a much more meaningful relationship, and she was going to have a real co-parent to work with her. And so moving became less important to her. So I think that felt like a very transformative experience, even from the very beginning. And so I thought that would be a good example for folks to hear about.
So it is 11:51, and if you have questions about the case or about what we said, please tell us after the break, but we will see you back at 12 o'clock. Okay? Thank you.
You're muted, Nanette. You're muted.
You're muted.
I would say, don't feel like you need to sign out. You can just turn off your camera and mute yourself and just relax.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm going to get some water myself. See you soon. All right, the recording has started, so now we gotta go. And when you come back, if you can try to put on your camera as well, as because I think it makes it well, first of all, personally, it feels more like I'm talking to people than just a name. Also makes us feel more together, I think. And then definitely I should already warn people, we're going to do a little looping exercise at the end. And for that one, you will need to have your camera on. So no special makeup or hair or anything required, we need to be able to see your eyes, because we're going to put in groups of 2 and you're going to loop each other. So you'll need to have your camera on at that point. Okay, so we're going to start again. Vicki, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the obstacles? Because not all cases have such happy endings as what Nanette described, but what could be the obstacles?
Before we move on, Antoinette and Vicki, I think before the break, I saw Sylvia's hand maybe raised.
Oh, thank you.
I wanted to give the opportunity to ask the question if there
Thank
was
you
one.
so much. Absolutely. Are there any questions or comments or anything that you want to talk? Who was it that had? Oh, Sylvia, you said?
I thought it was Sylvia.
Yes. Sylvia, did you have a question, or did you raise your hand, or was it just Zoom malfunction? Let's Seems to be maybe the latter. Okay, but that being said, do people have any questions or any comments? Were things clear?
Oh, we have 2 raised hands.
Okay, Peter, and who do you see? Who else?
And Brad Roth.
Brad. Okay, let's start with Brad.
Hi, thank you. Very quick question. I understand that transformative mediation, I know you don't like the labels, but I'm just curious in terms of not being directive, and I imagine it's through kind of open-ended questions, but when you notice that there's a certain dynamic, when the mediator notices a certain dynamic between the parties, how do you bring that up in a way that's kind of not directive? And also, to what extent are you bringing into, taking into account the cultural mores that might predominate in certain dynamics, within the dynamics of certain relationships?
I have something to say, but I don't know if Nanette, Lenina, or Vicki.
Well, you go first. Well,
I think when we say non-directive, we mean by non-directive that we're not directing the what, which is the substance. So, but we are in charge of the how. So in the mediation, the what is the divorce, the amount of child support, the parenting time. That's what is going to be in the agreement. And unlike other types of mediations where mediators can be much more directive, well, you know, the law says that, and I think you should probably just like, this is going to be what's in your agreement. We really let them make as many decisions as they possibly can. Sometimes the law is directive in and of itself, but if not, really, that should be totally their decisions. But on the how, which is how we mediate, whether we caucus or not, whether we choose at some point in the mediation to loop the dynamic, that's kind of our job. But that's very different than telling people what should be in their agreement. So, and in terms of the cultural mores, I think you're right that it is an issue. Like if you have a couple where, you know, I'm just going to give a very sort of, I'm not saying particular culture, but where women don't talk or women don't have a say, or and we have our own ideas about what women should and should not say or do. So I think for all of these issues, we after every mediation, we debrief the mediation. And when we debrief, we talk, so the 2 mediators, usually we co-mediate our cases, will go into what worked, what was challenging, and then what were our judgments. And so we'll talk about our judgments of the parties, and those issues of cultural differences or race, age, gender, you name it. Hopefully we will talk about that in our debrief, and being aware of our judgments mean that we can actually address it more and say, oh yes, I realize, you know, this person annoys me because of XYZ, and hopefully the other co-mediator would say, oh yeah, and this is what's happening. And so we will try to address, maybe strategize for the next mediation, or seek information. Maybe we don't know enough about the background of the people we're mediating with, and we should, you know, get more educated.
I think one thing to add as far as the cultural aspect goes, I once had a mediation where one of the spouses was getting really angry every time a certain topic was being discussed. And I brought up, I was like, you know, I see that your anger, it seems like it's building, and you're visibly angry. We can all see that you're angry. And the person got really upset and said, I don't want you to use that word. It's a stereotypical word. It's very triggering. And I think in that situation, you just have to say, well, how would you describe how you're feeling? You know, because I'm not really here to judge you. And, you know, trying to keep it neutral. It's not about you. I'm not trying to change how you react. It's more so of, we want to bring out what you're feeling. So, you know, however you would describe that is what is our goal here. So then I would just kind of like redirect to interests. You know, it's not perfect, but it's something that can work.
Peter, did you had your hand raised?
Yes, I don't know how to stop it from being raised, but
you did.
Well, I have a very big question, and I can ask it at the end or not at all in this session. But you know, everything that you're saying so far, and your description of the conflict, is relevant to vast national questions, such as the Trump supporter who fails to see or experience the legacy of slavery and the suffering of Black people or of immigrants clamoring at the border, and sees nothing of them, sees only a repetition of their own feeling of being overwhelmed and losing their community. And also the Black Lives Matter activist who sees nothing of the feeling of loss of identity of the Trump supporter and only sees their racism, but doesn't see underneath that to their feeling of that they don't have anything anymore in terms of feeling community or connection to other people. I'm giving, so this is something that all these things are relevant to addressing that conflict just as much as they're relevant to addressing the conflicts that you're talking about. Should we talk about that? For example, let's just say one thing about it. I can imagine we think that these things can only be worked out in a way in conflicts between the people in the room, but people can watch a conflict being resolved if they saw a mediation between two such people, they might be able to internalize it in a much larger way. So I'll say we could talk about this at some.
Yeah, I think you're right that, I mean, a lot of what, first of all, I will preface it with saying, like, just because you're a mediator doesn't mean that you have all of the same flaws that we all have about seeing things in black and white and, you know, hating Trump supporters or hating whatever. Like we still, you know, it's still hard to apply these principles in our own lives. That being said, it is true that it is a process that requires, I think, some motivation. So you would have to have people wanting to learn more about what are these other people that I hate? What are they? What do they have anything in common with me? And I do know that there were some groups that were made, like they did some, I've heard, I can't remember where, but it was like a group of people from Massachusetts and another group from somewhere in Texas. And then they met together and then and you have these facilitators who talk about like, you know, what people have in common. Like it makes people talk about things in their personal lives. And then people realize that they have much more in common as humans than there are differences between them. So I'm not saying it's impossible. It would require some motivation, and then it's a time-intensive process, and it's not always very comfortable. I think it's much, in terms of the national language, it's much easier to just be on a tweet and go with people, or on Facebook or whatever, with people who totally agree with you. And I'm guilty of that. I don't watch Fox News. I don't read, you know, the New York Post. So I'm staying in my silo also, but it's uncomfortable to be in conflict. We just, as humans, we don't like it. That doesn't feel good mentally, emotionally, even physically. Like literally, you'll see people who are physically really unwell when we are mediating at times. So, but that being said, I think the rewards are huge, right? The reward of like going through the conflict together and then coming out on the other side, not seeing eye to eye. Like, it's not like, you know, we mediate and then our clients are like wonderful and they love each other. But they are usually, I would say, the couples who are happiest in my mediations are the ones that had the hardest mediation. And I'm always surprised because I'm thinking, like, I'm sending them my evaluation form and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be horrible because it was so hard. And they're the ones that have the most glowing reviews, you know. But I think it's because we think it's impossible. I cannot do this mediation. And then they come out the other way and the other end. And they're happy to have done it that way. So there are definitely rewards.
I think if I could jump in, Antoinette, one of the sort of more obvious things that we haven't really said, because I think partly in this model and in mediation, is that the idea that conflict is not necessarily negative, right? It's not necessarily bad and doesn't have to be a bad experience, right? Conflict is an opportunity for deeper understanding. And that is how we approach the work. That's how we approach mediation. And in this process, the mediator helps the parties, the participants, to reach not only a deeper understanding of the other side and their position, but a deeper understanding of their own position, because we probe as to motivation, and because we continually probe deeper beyond the motivation and the motivation for the motivation and the motivation for the motivation of the motivation, we're asking those questions, right, with genuine curiosity, which allows the participant to have curiosity for their own position and have to probe their own position deeper to be able to answer those questions, and to have other participants listening in on that process of asking questions and hearing this deeper understanding of the other person's own position, right? You get to really where you begin to form new positions that come up in agreement, right? And so I think that that's why it can translate into bigger questions and larger conflicts.
We have in the chat, Rand has asked, he's interested in hearing more about the transformative part of transformative mediation.
So should we continue with, when we've talked about the transformative part, the positive transforming part for our clients, and we were going to talk a little bit about some of the obstacles of that, and then we'll talk about the transformative part of mediation on the attorneys after that. Vicki, do you want to say a little bit what could be an obstacle or a limitation of this model?
Yeah, so the transformation that we're trying to kind of get at is, you know, we're trying to transform their communication with each other to come to an understanding and to hopefully help them, you know, to resolve their divorce or their family issue. And I think in order to do that, they both need to be negotiating in good faith, right? You have to come to the table knowing I have a position, but I'm here to work with the other person. And if you're not here to work with the other person, you know, there's no transformation. So we see this kind of in two ways, where the first way Antoinette briefly discussed already, which is when there's a difficult dynamic. So one person is very aggressive. One person is very, what we call avoidant, which is they don't like conflict. They'll try, you know, one person will say yes, the other will say no. If the other person says yes again, it's kind of like, okay, well, you know, I'm going to back off. And then what happens is when it comes time for attorney review, there's a very different story. And then there's a lot of renegotiation and pushback. And, you know, then it seems very unfair to the party who was there and mediating, because then they say, well, this is not what we agreed to. But the person is now feeling empowered because they're not in the room with the aggressive party who they're used to always deferring to. And then it creates a conflict where there really has been no transformation. And now the attorneys are fighting, and it becomes sort of like court outside of court. And then there's another sort of dynamic where we do a DV screen, a domestic violence screening. No domestic violence is apparent, but as the mediation goes on and we become more comfortable with the mediators and, you know, our true self starts leaking out, there's, you know, this presence of coercive control with one party. And since we have a model where we don't caucus, so meaning we don't pull the parties in different rooms and try to negotiate with them separately, this dynamic starts to come out. And, you know, I've done a case where suddenly the wife ran to the bathroom and we didn't know what was going on. And when she came back, we kind of, you know, tried to go back to the topic. We, you know, addressed that there was some tension. Do they want to talk about that? And she revealed to us, you know, he's doing what he always does, you know, and he's smirking. Suddenly all of the things we've agreed to, he says, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore. And, you know, with a smirk, and she's getting more upset. And she's like, I don't want to give him the satisfaction. And then it became, you know, this very sort of unhealthy and toxic mediation session. And when they they ended for the day, they spoke with their lawyers and they decide the wife decided she no longer wanted to do this. And that was something that we did not push at all. Because if you feel that this is not, it's not going to result in something fair and reasonable and something that you consent to, then we can't continue. You know, we're not going to try to bring you apart, force you into doing anything, tell you what the law is. We're here to support you. And if this model is not supporting you anymore, even though we've done 6 sessions or however many sessions, you know, even though we're legal services providers, yes, we have a lot of clients. We take the integrity of our process over everything else, I think.
The worst thing is not 2 parties who don't sign an agreement. The worst thing is 2 parties sign an agreement that they later regret.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are some the good faith negotiation, and that part is also usually when there is coercive control, then the good faith element is not there, because usually the person who's trying to control the other party is not mediating thinking about, I want a final agreement. They're mediating because it is one way to maintain the other party within their control. And we see that in court all the time, where, you know, the person who is abusive or physically violent, etc., once they lose control because their partner has left, the only way to bring the person back in their orbit is through the court. And they can do that in mediation or through the court. The problem is that if they do it in mediation, there's no end in sight, because we're not going to make a decision ever. The court might take a long time, but ultimately there will be a decision made by the judge. And so that's where we have to really be very careful not to mediate those cases, because that is in no one's benefit. I always say a mediation session or an adjourned date in court, they're dates. They're bad dates, but it's a date. Like the abusive party knows that that day at that time, they will see the other party. And probably they will see the other party suffer, because honestly, who wants to be in court or even mediating is like, it's tough. It's not no one's idea of fun. So do people have any questions about that? Because it's a big issue in legal services. And for our program is making sure that we mediate fully the right cases. And we screen a lot of cases out. All right. Do we want to talk a little bit on the transformation on the attorneys? I don't see any raised hands, right? No. Okay.
I think Lenina was going to. Kick us off on
Yeah.
So for me, being trained as a mediator in many ways changed my practice. It changed the way that I relate to my clients, and it changed the way that I interact with clients, and in some cases interact with the court, right? Unfortunately, I stopped resolving as many cases once I became a trained mediator. It's like I don't settle anything anymore. But I think that that is because I better understand my clients, their motivations, and what their needs are. And so it makes me sometimes a more aggressive advocate for those positions because of a deeper understanding of why they're litigating cases, right? I don't know if that's good.
It's interesting.
I think it's good.
Yeah.
So I also had an example of a case where it's not just being trained as a mediator, but also having a mediation community sort of where you can debrief, where we can talk about our cases and we can talk about difficulties that we're having, both in our mediations and in the cases that we're litigating. But I had a case that was a very difficult domestic violence case. There was a very high level of contention, not only between the parties, but between the parties and the court itself. So it was a very emotionally charged case in every aspect. The father in this case, I was representing the mother, was a difficult person in that I say that he's a difficult person not only because of the domestic violence factors, but he was also a person who was regularly getting kicked out of the courtroom for his lack of decorum and his demeanor, right? Towards the court, towards my client, towards me. So it was a very difficult case. It was also a case that was really difficult for my client. She had two toddler twins, which Antoinette probably knows better than anyone else. I only had one and I was good, right? Twins, and then was dealing with, right, and then was
toddlers,
and toddlers, right. So they were on the move and they were always hungry and messy, right, all the time. And then she was dealing with this very messy split up in this very messy case. But what would happen is we would come to court, the father would ask for whatever he asked for, which was more time with the kids. She would agree. We would leave court. And then she would call me panicking because the father was calling her to come and help him take care of the twins during his parenting time. We would go through this. We went through this many, many times where I would advise her and counsel her on how I felt she should not only handle the request for more time, but also what we should do about it in court. And inevitably we would go back to court and the same thing would happen. And I was at my wit's end with this client. I was frustrated with this process. And came to the mediation group. What I ended up doing, thanks to my colleagues, was looping this dynamic with my client and going through what I was going through, what I was feeling, and what I was observing that she was doing and how she was interacting with both the court, with me, and with her former partner. And in looping that dynamic and in describing for her what I was observing without judgment, without advice, without counsel, and without my opinions about whatever was going on, she was able to see that dynamic for herself, was able to recognize that it's not working and this is my role in the part that's not working, and was now open to, rather than a panicked call to me at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, of course, finding a different way of resolving these problems and finding a different way of resolving the solution, of finding a solution to the problem, when we were able to get underneath what it was that my client was feeling, what it was that my client was afraid of, and how we could better interface not only with each other, but with the court and with the other party. And so the skills that you learn in mediation and what you do in mediation does translate, as we were talking about before, it does translate to outside problems, right? Like I said, I don't settle cases anymore.
I can't believe that's true, but anyway. And also, if you say, well, mediation is helping me understand my clients better, it's hardly a fault. But
no, I'm not saying that as a bad thing.
Yeah,
but certainly has changed, right? That those interactions.
Well, and also in this particular case that you're describing, what the client's part into this dynamic was to run to him every time he would call and say, I need your help. And so instead of giving him more and more time, which was his way of bringing her back into his orbit, because of course, like which mother wants to leave their toddler twins with a parent who says, I can't handle them. So instead, maybe giving less time, but not going there to help him so that he could learn to take care of toddler twins. And those little twins, toddlers are very resilient anyway. And so once she understood that, that changed the dynamic and that changed the case. And then in the end, they resolved it, right?
In the end, we resolved it. We did start the hearing, but we resolved it.
Oh, you did? It's not over? Oh, wow.
No, it's done. It's done.
It's done. But the most important is that you also mended your relationship with your clients, because you were at the end like, I don't want to hear about her. I don't want to get these phone calls. I don't want to work on her case when she's doing the same thing to me. And that was a bad dynamic, and that changed. And that's hugely helpful too.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Do people have any questions, comments?
Antoinette, I thought maybe I'd add a little something sort of on a little bit different vein of what Lenina, and thank you for that example, Lenina, is, you know, in terms of transformation of us as practitioners, I mean, we do examine our own biases a lot. And it does come up because we may find ourselves in a mediation really just having a visceral reaction to one of the parties and how they acted and the positions they took. And so we would actually make a point, let's say at the next session, to really be the one to work with that other party and to really confront our own biases and to try to, and to talk about that with each other. So to be very self-conscious, and that's very helpful in sort of our sort of development as our attorneys. And it also fosters open communication between us, because as colleagues, you know, we're not often talking about the feelings that we're having and the reactions that we're having on a daily basis when we're talking about our cases. So that was one thing. And then the other is, I think the project also helps us, you know, by offering this, being able to offer this process that is more about communication and self-determination and potentially healing to clients, and to enable them to not have to engage with the court process, which can be very, very difficult. We really are offering our clients something important and meaningful in legal services. And it's something that, I mean, mediation has grown a lot in many sectors of the legal community, but it really has not really come into its own very much yet in the low-income client community. And we feel that offering our clients a chance to have a healing process of this nature is a very important component of the work. So I think that's empowering to us as lawyers in this work that we do. So just
I actually wanted.
Go ahead, Vicki. No, go ahead.
I wanted to kind of piggyback off of that and say, I think our clients, meaning the low-income community, are the least heard in disputes, in public relations in general, you know, because they're looking for help, and they're looking for help that they can't, you know, afford. They can't afford the super aggressive attorney who's going to go against the other super aggressive attorney for 4 years, you know, for one overnight. They can't, a lot of times they can't even, you know, in New York, in matrimonial court, there's no right to counsel. So you'll sometimes see two pro se people, they don't even have any issues, but the judge is so frustrated by them. They're getting screamed at, you know, they can't even get a basic, you know, recitation of the law sometimes. And by the time they've come to you, they've called, you know, 20 organizations, they, you know, and to provide a service where, you know, as an attorney, I can be a better listener because I know how to do this. You know, I loop my clients, litigation clients, mediation clients, and I think it's made me a better attorney just in general.
And for those who work with survivors of domestic violence, one of the bad side effects, burnout, is that you tend to believe that the world is a very dark place full of really bad people who are doing terrible things to other human beings. And when you mediate, now we mediate cases where there is no domestic violence, but when you mediate, then you realize, okay, this is not all of humanity. And that is also a really good therapy against burnout and against this sort of very like vicarious trauma response that I think a lot of lawyers or paralegals or social workers who work with survivors experience. So we're I want to move forward because I want to make sure we have time for our little looping exercise. We want to talk a little bit about the transformation on the judicial system. Nanette, do you want me to talk about that, like the New York,
yes, go for it. Go
New York
ahead.
State? So in 2018, our chief judge in New York State instituted this ADR advisory committee to give her recommendations for increasing use of ADR in the court system. It's not just for family law, it's commercial, civil, malpractice, insurance claims, you name it. I've been on that advisory committee since 2018. And I would say if it was just a committee, as we know, like how much influence do they have on the actual court system? But in fact, the chief judge actually mandated all of the judicial systems to come up with plans for how they were going to increase use of ADR in their own courts, in their own judicial districts. So this has been really activating the courts. It's still not at scale because all of these court programs are still pilots. They're not, mediating thousands of cases. And we know in New York City, especially, we have like some courts have literally thousands and thousands of filings every day. So I would say in terms of the US, there are other states that are way more advanced in terms of use of ADR, including Minnesota. Assuming the term ADR, what were you saying, Nanette? That
I just wasn't sure if everybody knew what it stood for.
Well, ADR
people from other countries.
Yes. Some people, well, actually, it's a good question. ADR usually means alternative dispute resolution. So it's something other than court. But I actually like to think that it's appropriate dispute resolution because there could be an array of different ways of dealing with conflict. And we want to make sure that we're using the right conflict resolution model for the right kinds of cases. But the idea is something else than just the adversarial litigation system that we have in the US. So it's coming. It's not where Minnesota and Texas, like there are states that I was surprised, but there are like many more models of conflict resolutions that are not purely litigation than New York State, but it is coming. So there is a small transformation. It's not a boiling, it's a little bit of simmering, but it is there. And I think maybe Nanette and Vicki, there was a little bit more to talk about, but I would prefer if we went into that little looping exercise that we've been talking, if it's okay with you. So Nanette and I are going to do a little demonstration of what we would like you to do. And I understand that some of you are at work and therefore you can't turn your camera on unless you're in one of those situations. Please turn your camera on when we start when you're going to be doing the work. So Nanette and I are going to do a little demo, and then I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, and then you're going to loop each other. So looping is a process. It's also called active listening. It's a way to listen to the other person where the party talks about whatever it is, and the looper is going to listen, and then is going to say in his or her own words, in their own words, what they heard the person say. So the looper should almost always start any sentence with, what I heard you say is. Now, if you want to like say word for word, you can. It would be better to paraphrase with your own words. But the idea is not for you to give advice or to say, oh, I understand or I hear you. No, what I heard you say is, and then say in your own words what you just heard the person say. And then check in with the person and say, did I get this right? And the beauty with looping is that you cannot be wrong, because if you are wrong and the person says, no, that's not what I said, that is your chance. That means you did not understand, or maybe the person didn't express themselves perfectly, but it doesn't matter. There was no perfect understanding, and we're trying to get to a perfect understanding. So you can say, okay, let me try again. Say what you want to say, and then you loop again. Did I get it right this time? And if the person says yes, then is there more? And sometimes I do this exercise and then people talk for 2 minutes and then they say, we're done. There's always more. Like if you give people a chance to breathe and think more, is there more? And I would like all of you to think about a conflict. You're going to need to think for like a minute in the beginning of this exercise about a conflict that you have. It could be, maybe it has to be something that upsets you. It can't be just a little thing that you didn't like. It has to have a little bit of an emotional charge. It doesn't have to be like the biggest conflict of your life with your mother since you were 2 and we're not doing therapy. And plus you're going to do that in your breakout room. But it's something that is charged where you have a disagreement with somebody. And then you're going to tell that conflict to the looper. The looper is going to loop you. And then when I'll say switch roles, you switch. Whoever did the loop, whoever was the looper is now going to tell their conflict, their disagreement, and then the other person is going to loop. Okay, so we're going to do a little quick demo. So Nanette, tell me, what is this disagreement you have with that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, well, Antoinette, I've been working at home now for about 1.5 years, and it's pretty comfortable. I just, it's just very, it's, not perfect, but it's been pretty comfortable. And now we're about to go back to our offices, and I'm dealing with the question of how many days a week I should go back, because I could go back full time. But I could also work at home as much as 3 days a week. And I as I said, I really, it's benefited me in many ways to be working at home. And, but the person I live with, they'd like some privacy. It's not easy having someone around full time for a very long time. So I'm grappling with that conflict.
So what I hear you say is the issue is you would like to stay working from home as much as possible, but your partner is like, no, I think you should go to the office. I want the space. I'm done with this, working from home for 18 months. Did I get it right?
You did. And, what it brings up for me is, well, isn't it nice having me at home? I mean, I can stop for lunch and run a little errand and just be present if something's come up for one of us. And what's wrong with having me at home? So it raises that issue for me.
So what I hear you say is you're kind of a little bit upset or disappointed or sad that your partner is not saying, oh yeah, stay, I'd love to have you around. That's where it feels a little bit like it's an issue for you.
Yeah, and yet it's total, that's what I'm feeling, and yet it's also totally reasonable to
Okay,
want
so
to have that. Yeah.
you got it? Did you get the gist of it? Yes? All right, so I'm going to create these breakout rooms.
Oh, I think Peter
Yes.
raised his hand.
Peter?
You're muted, Peter. Peter, you're muted. Peter? He doesn't hear. Let me see if I can.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, I'm back.
Okay.
Okay.
Perhaps
so-
it's not the time for a question, but Nanette, the second part of what you said there, when you realized that you were feeling rejected by your partner, because he didn't want you around the house, so to speak, wouldn't the mediator have to elicit that a bit more in order for it to come into the conversation, most likely? Here, you were insightful enough to realize that was underlying your feeling, but
Yes, you're right. You're right, Peter. And I was trying to rush it along so that we could, but you're right that in the natural looping process, something like that would have taken more to get to, for sure.
All right, so I'm gonna put all of us, is that okay? Because it's much easier. So Vicki, Nanette, and Lenina, we're all gonna be in breakout rooms with other people. So we'll do the looping in there, okay? All right, I'm gonna open, so we're gonna all do this. I'm gonna give like 3.5 minutes for each person. So choose very quickly who's going to start first. Choose very quickly your conflict if you can, and then go ahead and loop. And then I'll send you a message saying switch who's doing the loop now. And try to not talk for 3 minutes and then the other party doesn't have the time to loop. So talk a little bit and then loop and then talk more and then loop. Okay. All right. Opening the rooms now. It should all be sent to. Okay. Oh, there's 4 of us here. You know what? Oh no, here's his. Okay. Oh, Nanette, we are together, so that's good. We don't have to do it because we already did it. All right,
Everyone else is in a room?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Let me see. Yeah, that's great.
Let me put the timer. Stopwatch. No, not alarm. 12. At what time am I going to do it?
So it's 12:45 exactly now.
So 12:48.
Okay.
I'm gonna do.
I'm going to stop the person report.
But we have a few minutes to we want to know, like, how did it feel to be the looper, to do the looping? How did it feel? And we understand we left you very little time to do all of this, but it was just to give you a little flavor. How did it feel?
So the looper is the one who repeats it,
Yes.
right? Reflects it back.
Yes.
So it felt fine. I think I was able to understand what Brad was saying and actually rephrase it in a way that was accurate, and he acknowledged that. So it felt.
It felt good to you. Good. Anyone had another experience? Eileen?
Mine was somewhat the opposite. I didn't quite get the main point the first time, and I was thrown by it. But then it was fine to then hear more and try again.
But it took a bit. It's not intuitive.
No.
Yeah. Ruth?
Yeah, so I found the experience really, really good for me. But I think that being that I know that this was an exercise and being that I knew that it was going to be like a mirroring exercise in a sense, I knew to listen better And so I did a good job with repeating, which is actually funny because like in real life, when I'm listening to even my friends or when I'm listening to a situation, I tend to drift apart, or like I tend to like daydream or even think about my response instead of like actively listening to the other person communicating with me. But being that I know that you're being that I knew you were going to ask questions, I think this was a activity like I made sure to focus, I made sure to clear my thoughts, and I made sure to actively listen to my partner, what she was expressing to me. But it was really good though.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very different, isn't it? Than like 99% of the time when we are with a friend or whoever, we listen, but we're already thinking about what we're going to say. We don't listen the same way. And with this looping, you can't think about anything else because you can't hold that many things in your head at the same time. So it really forces you to focus on the other party. On the person that you're listening to, and you can use it with anyone. I mean, it doesn't have to be that you're a mediator mediating. How did it feel to be looped?
Well, for me, it felt great because I was angry, I was in conflict, and finally somebody understood what I was talking about. I mean, I felt heard, I felt validated. You know, and it was just a matter of him reflecting how I felt. So I felt good. It felt
it feels wonderful, and we realize how rarely it happens in life. That when it does happen, we feel so good, and it feels very different than when someone says, "I hear you," even though it's doing the same thing in a way, but you're really demonstrating that you're understanding the person. Any other comments? Maybe some people don't like it, some people love it. I don't know.
I appreciated it, and I actually have my students do looping also in the class that I teach. And one thing we emphasize is it's not only the content, but it's also the emotions that you're reflecting. And so it was really great to hear Perry not only reflect the content of what I said, but he was just as a human being reflecting the emotions that I was feeling, and that feels validating. And you feel like you're that the conflict is something that's not just your own, but it's something that has a kind of a broader or wider significance, because another person outside the conflict can resound to it or reflect it in a way that you know that it's not just your own issue, but relatable. So I appreciated that.
That being said, looping is not agreeing. And a lot of times people say, but I don't want to loop because I don't agree with what they say. That's not the point. The point is not to agree or disagree with what the person has said. The point is to demonstrate your understanding and to make sure you understood, because maybe you didn't. I mean, we assume things all the time. We think someone said this, but in fact, they said something else. Peter?
Right, I appreciate that clarification also, right? Because a lot of times what you'll loop is something that you obviously are not going to, you're not a party to the dispute. So thank you for that, that precision. And, but it's just knowing that the emotions being heard and reflected, I think has that effect on the speaker, that at least their emotion is being, has landed in some way and is out there. Thank you.
Yeah. It's 12:59 and I'm a stickler for time. Peter, did you want to add something, or did anyone want to say anything? Or I want to thank all of you. It was a pleasure spending this time with you. I hope that it gave you an interesting things to think about. And if you are interested in mediation, you can always email us. I'm sure that Peter, you can give the participants our contact information, or if you, and I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one about trainings if you want. I know quite a bit about online trainings, and I just want to thank you and my co-presenters.
I have one more thing I'd like to add. If everyone would unmute their microphones for just a second. I have some inside information that next Sunday is Nanette Schorr's birthday. So I think we all ought to sing Nanette, the mother of Pie Slap, a happy birthday. Are you all ready? 1, 2, 3.
Happy
birthday to you.
Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday,
birthday,
dear
dear Nanette.
Happy
birthday
birthday
to
to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elaine, for bringing your little one.
I'm sorry.
Awesome. He's so cute. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Before we break up, just thank you all for being part of the intensives. This is our last one. They've been extremely successful, I think. I hope you feel that way. Each distinct, on a distinct subject with a distinct quality, from restorative justice 5-6 days ago through today. So thank you so much for being part of this, I think, pretty successful experiment in an alternative to a conference. I thought, personally, speaking for myself, I got a huge amount out of it. So thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Good luck,
and
Vicki.
programs.
Thinking about you.
Thank you, Antoinette, Lenina.
Join Pie Slap.
Vicki.
Yes.
Please join.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Hi, Peter.
Oh, it's hi, Nanette.
Oh, wait, hold on. Let me turn on.